Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2 second major video of the day as we just got the patch notes for the 222 PTS for the game. And these are pretty major. Not only are we getting a look at all of the new changes with Seasons 2.0, the new gear, weapons, exotics coming to the game, but there's been a huge balancing pass done across the entire endgame with gear sets, old exotics, old talents, loot pools, a bunch of stuff. So this is shaping up to be a pretty sizable update, and we get to dive into it all tomorrow on the PTS. So, two things to shout out. This is coming after the dev stream that the devs hosted this morning, going into depth with Seasons 2.0, showing us, live examples. I already put a video out on that. I'll link it in the upper corner. You can check it out on my video feed. And then additionally, I will be going live tomorrow morning for the PTS. So I'll post the exact timings in a little bit on the community tab. But yeah, we're going to be going into all of this stuff live. We can check out how it works. You can ask me questions, all of that. So if you're able to tune in, we would love to see you. But let's start it off right here. As you can see, they tweeted out PC players, the 222 PTS preload is here. So if you're on PC, just go on UB Connect, you'll see the PTS in your library and you can download it there. And then they say, and there are lots of changes to test. With so much to explore, the patch notes come in 3 parts. Dive in. So like I said, we have a ton of this stuff to go over. As you can see, we have all of these different things. So let's get to it. We're going to start here with the new stuff. Seasons 2.0, new gear, weapons, and talents. Now, I'm not going to fully go through the Seasons 2.0 things because we just did that in the video I put out earlier this morning with live examples. Right on stream, the devs actually showed us what all this stuff is. It wasn't just words and text. Of course, I will link these patch notes in the description if you do want to go in and read these, but I also encourage you to check out my video that I put out, like I said, just a few hours ago, because you can actually see all of this stuff in action. Again, I will leave a link for that video in the description there, but this is all of the stuff that we covered in that video, the Seasons 2.0 seasonal journey, modifiers, priority objectives, man-out scouts, all of that. So let's skip on down here to the new gear. Firstly, we have the new brand set, which is Legatus SPA. The 1-piece gives you 30% swap speed, 2-piece 50% optimal range, and the 3-piece 15% weapon damage. It comes with a new named backpack called Vigil. The talent is perfect versatile, so you get amplified damage for 10 seconds when swapping between the primary and the secondary, 45% for SMGs and shotguns within 15 meters, 35 in PvP, 45 further than 25 meters for rifles and marksmans, 35 in PvP, and 20% between 15 and 25 meters for LMGs and ARs, and at most once per 5 seconds per weapon type. And then secondly, we get a new named mask called the Visionario, I believe is how you would say it, which comes with a perfected attribute of 50% optimal range. That's quite a bit. I don't know how viable that'll really be, but that's interesting. But here we have the new gear set for the season called Virtuoso. Again, I think that's how you say that. The 2-piece gives you 15% weapon handling and 15% magazine size. The 3-piece gives you another 15% weapon damage, and then the 4-piece has the unique talent called Symphony. So, killing an enemy farther than 30 meters will provide 30% weapon damage to shotguns, SMGs, and pistols, 15% weapon damage to ARs and LMGs, and 25% bonus armor for 10 seconds. Additionally, if you kill an enemy within 30 meters, you get 30% weapon damage to MMRs and rifles, 15% to ARs and LMGs, and 30% headshot damage for another 10 seconds. But then, if you intermittently kill enemies from both of those two ranges, from farther than 30 and closer than 30, you will build up stacks. At 4 stacks, all bonuses are doubled and triggered at the same time for 10 seconds. No stacks are required while these bonuses are active. Okay, so that might sound confusing, but it's actually kind of an interesting concept here. So there's 2 ranges you need to deal with, closer than 30 meters and farther than 30 meters. This actually all plays into the seasonal modifier as well. Again, check out my other video. We go into the point blank modifier that's going to be active for the season, but it deals a lot with damage at different ranges, and that's what we're seeing here. If you're able to have a build where you kill enemies farther than 30 meters and closer than 30 meters, you can get a ton of bonuses from this, right? 30% weapon damage from this, 50% bonus armor, 60% headshot damage. So definitely need some testing. I think there could be, either pros or cons in gameplay here, but definitely an interesting concept. The 2 amplification talents on the chest piece, you get Fortissimo. I'm horrible with names. Anyway, double the weapon damage bonuses in the Symphony. That's big. So you would get 30% for each of these if you're using an AR, and then when it's doubled, 120% or something? That's a lot of math. But anyway, some very high potential here with his gear set, I would say. The backpack talent is then Accelerando. Decrease the number of stacks needed to proc the Symphony double buffs from 4 to 3. Right, so instead of needing 2 kills at long range, 2 kills short range, it would just be 1, 1, 1. And then you get it. So that's pretty good. All right, we then get to the Centurion Scabbard, which is the new exotic holster. The talent is counter. Swapping weapons will give the following group bonuses one by one in order. The first buff is 20% rate of fire and 20% weapon damage. So that's kind of insane. The second is then 50% magazine size and 50% reload speed. The bonuses will remain active for 8 seconds or until the next weapon swap. Swapping to your sidearm will not trigger the next group of bonuses. Interesting. Okay, I definitely want to see this happen in gameplay because I'm a little bit confused by the wording, one by one in order, but then there's 2 of these and 2 of these. So would it go rate of fire, magazine size, weapon damage, reload? Or do you get both of these at once and then these 2? I'm a little bit confused by that. That sounds pretty powerful. I'm definitely a little bit nervous about PvP. Like, are people just going to run around with a swap build where you swap, get a ton of damage, including you could use the perfect versatile now and just, pop off on a player? I don't know. That's something I want to keep an eye on. But at face value, the Centurion Scabbard definitely seems quite strong, so that's pretty cool. This one I'm most excited for. I did peek at this stuff beforehand. The Striga is the new exotic FAL AR that we're getting next season. I'm so excited for this. The talent is Unnerve, right? Killing an enemy will apply a mark on every enemy within 20 meters of it. Multiple marks can be applied on the same enemy. And for each mark that an enemy has, you deal 15% amplified damage to that target. So think about this. You're in a DZ landmark, you're at a control point, you pop a red ad, that spreads a mark to every enemy within 20 meters, which is a pretty sizable range. I mean, it's not infinite, but 20 meters is solid. Now you deal 15% amped damage to all of those targets. Let's say you kill another one, it spreads it again. You could stack up 3, 4, 5 of these stacks and get huge amounts of amplified damage on targets. This is going to be an insane new exotic AR. I'm very excited for this thing. I would say the mods are definitely where it gets held back a little bit, which I mean is good. It shouldn't just be, the best new thing of the game. It has a 20 round mag mod, which is solid. Then it has 5% crit damage and crit chance. That's obviously, I would say this is a good counterbalance to the St. Elmo's, which has a very, very strong mods, but then less of a lethal damage talent. This has a very lethal damage talent, but slightly less strong mods. And then in addition, you get 10% weapon handling on the underbarrel. So very excited to try out the Striga here. This is probably my most hyped new item. I can't wait for this thing. But let's move on to the new named weapons and talents. The new weapon talent we're getting is called Precision Strike. Killing enemies farther than 20 meters builds up stacks. Max stack is 3. Hitting an enemy within 20 meters will use all of the stacks to provide 20% amplified damage per stack to enemies within 20 meters for 5 seconds. Interesting concept. I would say this definitely sounds more like a marksman rifle or rifle kind of talent. Could be interesting. If you pair it with that, we'll see. Then you get the perfected version, which is that the max stack is 2, so you have a shorter build-up time, and then you get greater amplified damage of 35% for those 2 things. I don't think we see what the actual named items are that are getting this, though, so I guess we'll find out on the PTS. Moving on to reworks, we have the Sledgehammer weapon talent. I know people like this one a lot. So previously, this is what it is in the game right now. Down here it is. Dealing damage with a grenade, of course, applies a mark to the target, and then it takes 30% more damage to armor from all group members and has a 20% movement speed debuff. The change is that this is no longer a group talent, right? So dealing damage with a grenade applies a mark on a target. Targets with marks take 30% more damage to armor from the agent that applied the mark and have a 20% movement speed debuff. Marks disappear after 10 seconds. So the functionality, the actual buffs and debuffs are exactly the same. It's just that it only now applies to you instead of the entire group. That is definitely pretty tragic. I know this is a big one that's used in raids and incursions. I mean, I use it there myself. I wonder if there's some kind of compromise to be made where group members still get advantage from it, but it's less. Like maybe they only get 10% damage to armor instead of 30. That way it's still viable in groups, but there's still other options that could outshine that. But yeah, for now, Sledgehammer is switching to a self-target only kind of talent instead of an entire group thing. The Mosquito Song exotic pistol is getting a big rework though, and this is pretty big. So currently in the game, it's just a threat item, right? When you hit an enemy, it applies a stack. Stacks are shared between players, and then at 10 stacks, the enemy will forcefully target the last player to apply a stack for 5 seconds. But now, this is what it does. Same functionality, hitting an enemy applies a stack, stacks are shared. At 5 stacks, the enemy will forcefully target, and for 5 seconds, they will take 40% more damage to armor from all sources. Stacks still deplete after 5 seconds, and all that stuff. So, these two have kind of swapped, right? The Mosquito was a very, I would say, niche item that was just dealt for threat. Maybe a few tank builds used it, but Sledgehammer was the big group damage one. The Mosquito is now going to be very strong in group content like raids, legendary missions, incursions, all that stuff, because you can get for the whole team a 40% damage to armor debuff on enemies. That's a pretty big deal, and that's a very big buff for the Mosquito pistol. Hopefully that leads to greater usage because, yeah, that's going to be pretty good. Final item then under this new stuff. This is pretty big. People are going to love this a lot. As of TU22, the following rifles and MMRs will become fully auto-frickin-matic. That is right. We are getting full auto rifles. Now, to my knowledge, this is not changing their actual RPM. all it's going to mean is that for the items listed here that we're going to go over, you do not have to spam the trigger anymore, which was my least favorite thing about rifles in this game. You can hold the trigger and it will fire at its maximum RPM. That includes our beloved babies for my Division 1 vets here, Lightweight M4 and the LVOA-C. Again, I don't think this is increasing their RPM. They're not going to really feel like ARs like they were in the first game, but you can use them fully automatically. You can just hold the trigger and they will shoot at their maximum RPM, which is still solid. It's slow, but it's solid. And with their increased base damage because they're rifles, that could be pretty good. And this is really good considering another change that we're going to get to in just a minute. But anyway, on the full list here, the ACR is getting us the UIC-15, the Ravenous, which is huge. That gun already has big damage potential. Its biggest downside was the fact that you had to spam the trigger and that it had kind of a rate of fire lockup after a while. So that's going to be really big. Big shift in the meta. The M1A, Lightweight M4, LVOA-C, MDR, Resolute MK47, the MK17, the SIG, and the USC. And then for the MMRs, the ones that are the more trigger tap ones already are getting this functionality. So the G28, the MK20, and the SVD. This is, I imagine, will be one of the most popular changes of this update. I think this is going to change the meta landscape by a lot. A lot of more builds are going to open up for endgame viability, again, especially with the Ravenous becoming fully auto. That's a big deal. All right, but as mentioned, this is just the start of what we have to go through, because then we have all the changes to the existing items in the game, right? Exotics, gear sets, talents, weapon mods, there's so much stuff. So we're going to try and be as concise as possible here, but let's get into section 2. Under balancing, they say with the introduction of Seasons 2.0, which brings new features like modifiers, scouts, priority objectives, and the seasonal journey, we've taken a fresh approach to balancing, aiming to give players different playstyles and more distinct personalities. This update will address a wide range of elements, including various weapon categories, exotic weapons and gear, weapon mods, talents, and gear sets. And as we go through this, you will denote what is what by looking for these icons. Green, of course, means buff, and red means nerf. There are some nerfs in here, but keep in mind, and they said this on the stream, they are open to feedback, right? They removed seasonal characters. That was like one of their biggest things with Seasons 2.0, but once people said, we're not a fan, they took it out. So as we get into the PTS and try this stuff out, none of that stuff is final. We can give our feedback, we'll see what they think, and make changes as we approach launch, but just keep that in mind. So we are going to go through all of this. Just keep in mind, I'm going to try and keep this concise and, you know, actually consumable. We're not going to get into like the nitty gritty of all this stuff because honestly, I don't think myself nor any of you, or nor a lot of you, I should say, some of you definitely do, but understand these like minor stat changes and details. Again, we'll be able to test it all ourselves and see how it feels on the PTS tomorrow. But again, I will leave a link for all of these patch notes in the description. So if you do want to go and, you know, fine comb through all of this, you can. But firstly, they say to weapons, the core stat section of the inventory preview of a weapon has been updated to also showcase headshot damage and optimal range. This is actually really nice because each weapon and weapon archetype has their own inherent buffs for these that aren't currently visible in the stat sheet, so that'll be really nice. They also then say the reload stat in the weapon handling section of the inventory preview of a weapon has also been updated to showcase 2 decimal points, so just some more precise stats there. Beginning with ARs though, again, tons of changes, as you can see right off the bat. So green means buff, red means nerf. Some of the base damages on these things are going down. The green is buff. These are across the categories of damage, rate of fire, mag size, reload speed, and optimal range. Again, on the left side, you have what it is currently in the game, so you can compare. The right side is the new changes. Again, tons of stuff to sift through. My boy, the Carbine 7 is getting a buff. That's nice. The Honey Badger is getting a good base damage increase and an RPM buff, so that's cool. Stuff like the TKB's getting a base damage increase while its RPM is going down a little bit. So a lot of stuff to look through there. Moving on to SMGs. Again, tons of changes across the board here. Most of the base damages are going down by just a little bit. Seems like they're shaving off some of the base damage stuff there because they're boosting a lot of the reload speeds and optimal ranges. I think they really want these to be effective in close quarters, but not just overpower everything and make that the dominant playstyle. So that's kind of what they're going for there. The one I'm very sad about is the MP7, my baby. Got a nice buff in Project Resolve to base damage and RPM, but it's going down by a good bit in both. So that is kind of sad. But again, all this stuff is for the sake of balancing, which I am a fan of. I know I'm sometimes in the minority there. That's okay. Feel free to leave your own reactions and thoughts to this in the comments below. But their aim, and again, this is just the beginning. We're going to go through weapon mods and talents and brand sets. There's a lot of changes holistically that are changing things across the board. LMGs here, again, a lot of base damage increases. This one's pretty major right here. They're changing the entire archetype of the M249. Its rate of fire is going up by 300. Whereas its base damage is coming down by like 19,000. So this is like an entire archetype change for that weapon, whereas most of these are a bit more subtle. But again, you can see those there. For rifles, keep in mind that this category, these two aren't meant to be here, those are ARs, but the rest of these are all subject to that fully auto change that we just went over. So this stuff is in addition to that. That's probably why they're reducing the base damage of some of these, is because they're going to be a lot more effective when they can just be fired at their max RPM. But again, some increases here. A bit surprised by the M1A. going up because that's already one of the best ones in the game. But you have, some slight decreases to these really high rate of fire ones. Obviously, those changes there. That's all good. They also note here that the 1886 will no longer deal reduced damage to arms and legs. I had no idea that was a thing, but they fixed that, so that's cool. Again, MMRs here. Keep in mind that the G28, the MK20, and the SVD are all going full auto, as we just covered. So these changes were in accordance with that, especially the G28 is getting another archetype change similar to the M249 that we just saw, where the rate of fire is going down, whereas the base damage is going up by a lot. So again, all of these changes are in accordance with that. Shotguns here, again, more changes. The M870 is going up by a bit, which surprises me because that's already one of the most dominant ones out there, at least in PvP, I will say. The KSG getting a huge buff. That's crazy. Reload speed is going up by a bit, but then the base damage is going up from 59 to 75. That's crazy. The ACS is also going up by a good chunk. So again, a lot of changes across the board here that we are going to have to test out, really see how they feel, how they impact the meta. Lastly, pistols are mostly getting buffed across the board. Their reload speeds are almost all universally going down, but the base damages are going up in some cases by a lot. The only exception is the D50, which is of course the reigning champ in the pistol category, so that's kind of funny. But yeah, a lot of those are going up as well. Again, we're going to have to see how all of this feels. But again, this is just the beginning of the entire balancing effort, because the next category here is weapon mods. And as you can see, I'll just scroll through here, most of these are green. Weapon mods across the board are getting some big buffs, and that absolutely plays into how you make a build and where your stats come from. So just keep in mind that some of this stuff is not in a vacuum. They're doing it in accordance with everything else. So if we glance through, extended mags are going up, to like 15 from 10. You get enhanced stability and accuracy and optimal range from some of this stuff. Again, all of the mags across the board seem to be going up. Out of the muzzles, we have increased stability, crit damage, optimal range, headshot damage. What else? Just more stability and handling stuff there. Again, crit damage. If we move on to optics, again, accuracy, reload speed, optimal range. The only slight nerfs are the ones that already have these inherent downsides to them. Some of those are getting increased, but again, going from 15 to 50 there, that's huge already. So yeah, more weapon handling, crit damage, on the underbarrel, more crit damage and all that stuff there. So weapon mods across the board, they don't give like a description for what their intention is here, but if the stats are shifting around across the board, weapon mods are absolutely going to be a much more vital part of your builds once Year 6 Season 2 goes live. Alright, gear talents. They're also changing some high-end talents that people don't use very often, which I know a lot of people have been asking for a long time. So for Entrench, the perfect version, or both of them I guess, you can proc it more often. It's going from 3 to 2 and 2 to 1. So that's nice. Gunslinger is getting a damage increase from 20 to 23. Kinetic Momentum is getting a damage increase from 1% to 1.5. That's pretty nice. This is already a solid talent, I think. So that'll be good. Obliterate is getting a nerf, which I shouldn't say is surprising because it is like one of the most used damage chess piece talents, but it is a pretty sizable one, going from 25 total stacks possible to 17. That's a lot. So we'll see how that feels in practice. Overwatch is getting a damage increase for the perfect version from 12 to 14. Perfect Spark is going from 15 to 18 for the perfect. And then Safeguard is going from 100% to 130. But again, a lot more coming. Now we have gear attributes. These are like the perfect items named items, I should say, that have perfected attributes on them. The Hollow Man is going from 10% health damage to 14. The Motherly Loves from 10 to 25. The Firm Handshakes from 15 to 16. Wow, hell of a buff there. The Claws Out from 9% pistol damage to 11%. The Picaro's Holster is going down a little bit. I'm sure some people will be sad about that. This is definitely one of the more used named items out there, but it's going from 15% weapon damage to 10. I think that's good. That promotes usage of a few other things while still leaving it relatively powerful because you get the double core stats, so that's nice. Then we have weapon talents, so that was the gear stuff. Now we move on to weapon talents. Perfectly Accurate going from 50 rather to 80. Perfect Allegro going from 22 from 12. That's going to be nice for that Invisible Hand AUG. Breadbasket, the normal version, is going from 35 to 55% and from 50 to 70 for the perfect. Eyeless is going from 20 to 30 and for the perfected 25 to 35. Fast Hands is getting a bit of a reduction. It used to be 4 and 8, now it's 3 and 5. Killer is getting a significant buff, which is going to be kind of crazy, specifically for the perfect version, but going from 40 and 50 to 70 and 90, that's going to be big. Ignited, similarly to Eyeless, is going up from 20 to 25 and 25 to 30. Optimist is getting a buff, which is quite surprising because that's already one of the most used weapon damage talents in the game. We'll see if that survives the PTS. It's going from 3.5 and 4 to 3, or sorry, from 3 and 4 to 3.5 and 4.5. Perfectly Optimized is going from 30 to 40. Perpetuation going from 50 to 75. Ranger is going from 2% for every 5 meters and 4 if it's perfect. Now it's 2% for every 4 meters and 3 if it's perfect. Again, that's Ranger's already quite good, so that's going to be solid. Reformation going from 30 and 40 to 60 and 80. That's a lot. Sadist is going from 20 to 30 and 25 to 35. Thunderstrike from 20 to 30, 25, 35. So it seems like all of the status effect ones have been changed, right? This is Shock. This is Bleed. Ignited was Fire. Eyeless is Blind. So all of those seem to be going up. Vindictive is going from 15 and 18 to 16 and 21 for chance and damage. Measured is getting a change, going from plus 20% and negative 30 for the top half to plus 25 and negative 25. And then the bottom half was negative 20 and plus 30. It's now negative 18 and plus 30, and then 38 if it's perfect. So some solid changes to Measured. I would assume that would increase its viability by a good bit. So that's nice. On Empty, going from 30 and 40 to 60 and 80. Outsider going from 125 for the perfect to 150. Behind You, which they just introduced in a recent season, is going from 15% and 20 to 20 and 25. Brazen is getting a buff. This is already one of the best new talents that came in this season. So that's a little bit surprising, but it's going from 3% amp damage to 3.5. So that'll definitely be nice. Perfect Jazz Hands is going from 30 to 50. And finally, we have Pumped Up on shotguns going from 1% and 5% to 1.2 and 6. We're not done yet, though. That was, all right, part 2 of the patch notes here, going over all of that stuff. But again, that is only, what was that? Gear and brand sets. Exotics. No, that was the next one. We did balancing weapons and talents. Now we have gear and brand sets, exotic weapons, gear, and loot pool updates. So again, we're almost there. Let's get to this one. So again, this is all the same. Balancing, they discuss their objectives there. Green is buff, red is nerf. Let's start with Hardwired under gear sets. Hardwired is going to be kind of crazy. It's going from feedback loop can occur once every 20 seconds to 10 seconds. So that means, and the backpack talent is also going from, instead of from 20 to 10, it's 10 to 5. They note that the changes won't affect PvP. That's good for Seeker Mine spam. But yeah, Hardwired in PvE is about to be kind of crazy. You can throw those Seeker Mines out quite often. So that's going to get a good buff there. Aegis is getting a buff. Instead of 3% damage resistance per enemy targeting, it's now 4%. So that should increase that viability by a little bit. The backpack talent is also going from 3 to 4 to now being 4 and 5. So that's solid. Heartbreaker is getting a nice little buff. Very happy about this one, so it can compete a bit more with Striker. Instead of getting 1% bonus armor and 1% damage to pulsed enemies per stack, you now get 1% bonus armor and 1.3% damage to pulsed enemies. So I believe if you use the chest piece, you can now get up to, 130% damage instead of 100. Again, that closes the gap a bit on Striker. Striker should still be the more powerful set, right? Because you don't have the bonus armor element of it, you're just getting damage. But I think it makes a lot of sense to narrow the gap a little bit so that Heartbreaker has value. If you want the reduction in damage to gain the bonus armor aspect of it, the survivability, that's a good change. This is the other big one in accordance with the rifle changes that we looked at, where a lot of those are becoming fully auto. Guess what? Aces and eights can now stack with rifles. That's the one change they're making here, is that instead of it just being a marksman rifle set, you can now build stacks, or rather flip the cards, by using a rifle or a marksman rifle. In addition to the new Striga Exotic FAL, this is my most hyped change. This is going to open up so many build options that I can't wait to test out on the PTS. Fully auto rifles with aces and eights, that's going to be crazy. So again, the damage values are the same, 30% amp damage. I believe the chest piece then takes it to 50, but you can just now use it with a rifle, which means you can hit those shots way more frequently, way more consistently. So that's going to be huge. Again, very excited to test out aces there. Then we get to Breaking Point, which just came out this season. Instead of being the increase from 4 to 6 for the backpack talent, it's now 4 to 7.2. So that's more incentive to use the backpack there. Negotiator's Dilemma is going up. Instead of the backpack talent giving you an increase from 60 to 100% as far as the shared crit damage amounts, it's now 112. So that's a nice little buff there. Ongoing Directive is getting buffed for the chest talent. These changes don't affect PvP. That's good to note. The hollow point ammo before went from 20 to 35 for your self damage, I should say. It's now going from 20 to 50. So that's a pretty big buff for Ongoing Directive. I already have a build for that in PvE, so I'm going to definitely be using that more. That'll be a lot of fun. Here's one of the big ones that a lot of people are going to freak out about. Personally, I will say I'm in favor of this. You can yell at me all you want. As I've stated many times before on this channel, I am okay with nerfs. I like for them to maintain a sense of balancing, a sense of other items in the game being viable, while not completely nerfing something to the ground. And in my opinion, that's what they're doing here with Strikers. What they're doing is just on the backpack talent, they're reducing it so that instead of your weapon damage going from 0.65 to 1%, right, that's the current version in the game, it's now going to be 0.65 to 0.85%. Again, personally, I think this is a very solid change, because what it means is that instead of you being able to get 200% weapon damage at full stacks if you're using the chest piece to get the extra stack values, it means that you will be able to hit a damage ceiling of 170%. So in totality, all this does is reduce the full capacity of Striker from 200% damage to 170. I think that is a very fair change. That does not nerf it to the ground. It's still going to be the highest damage set in the game. But like we mentioned with stuff like Heartbreaker, it just narrows that gap a little bit so that other stuff has some room to be viable, some room for creativity, some room where you can use it and not be like, I could be using Striker and be doing way more right now. So again, I still predict Striker is going to be very popular. It's probably still going to be the most used set in the game, but they're just bringing it down a little bit. I think that's a solid change. They're buffing Umbra only in PvE. I think that's a very good note to make, because in PvP, especially in Conflict, this set is already very dominant. But in PvE specifically, they're changing it so that instead of getting just 1% crit damage and 0.3% RPM per stack, you now get 1.2% crit damage and 0.4% RPM. So that might increase some of its viability in a PvE content for sure. All right, that was all of the gear sets. Let's now move on to the brand sets. We got more to go over here. Now again, green is buff, red is nerf. At first glance, while this might seem, some of these you might be like, why are they doing this? You have to keep in mind it's in totality of everything they're doing. They're buffing weapon mods. We're going to be getting way more power now with stuff like the seasonal modifiers that we just went over in my last video. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at some of this. And again, we're going to test it all on the PTS. So Alps, the one piece is going down by about 3.5%. Electrique, the one piece is going down by 1.7%. China Light, three piece getting buffed. Empress is going down on the three piece. I think that one is mostly warranted. Empress is very dominant in that category. Murakami, 1 and 3 going down. The 2 is going up by a little bit. R and K going down on the 1 a little bit. Wyvern is going down on the 1, but the 2 and 3 are getting buffed. Again, that's pretty popularly used with skill builds. 511 is only going up. Same with Bellstone and Hanayu for the 3. So those are some of the changes there. Then for the second category, we have Golan going down on the 1. Same with Habsburg, but the 3 piece is going up. Langmo, the 2 piece is going down a little bit. Uzina, the 3-piece Hazard is going up. Y'all is getting a buff. That's pretty nice. The 2 piece is going up to 10 from 5. On Araldi, the 2 piece is going down a little bit. On Seska, the 1 piece is going down from 10 to 6.5. That's definitely going to be one people feel, but again, your weapon mods are going up. So in theory, if you're using this, it should balance out. But the 2 pieces then going up to 20% hazard. That's going to be nice with like a ninja bike build. On Sombra, again, the 1 piece is going down by a little bit on the crit damage, as well as the headshot damage for the 3. Providence, all 3 are going down. That's pretty big. People are definitely going to feel that one. But yeah, and then Sokolov, the 2 pieces going down a little bit on the crit hit damage too. But let's keep moving because we are not done yet. We then get to exotic weapons. Firstly, some big buffs coming to the Bighorn, which I would say needs it. Maybe. I mean, it's strong in PvP in certain scenarios, but I'd say it's still kind of lax in PvE. What they're doing here is that instead of 4% headshot damage per stack, it's now going up to 6%. So that's going to be a pretty hefty damage increase in terms of the total stack capacity. The mods are also going up. You now get 40% on the optic instead of 30. The mag is getting an extra bump there. The reload speed, what am I looking at here? Oh, I see 10% reload speed is going up. The muzzle, and some of that stuff, you can read right here. So a lot of the mods are going up with the Bighorn along with the damage. I'll be interested to see if that increases its PvE viability. This is another one of the big nerfs they're doing. The St. Elmo's engine, again, just calm down. Let me read through it. All they're doing is that instead of it getting 20% crit damage on the optic and 20% crit chance on the muzzle, it's now 15 and 15. So it's losing 5% in each of those values. It's also losing 10% weapon handling on the mag, or whatever that is, and it's also losing 10 rounds total. So again, in my opinion, I think this is good. The St. Elmo's very much dominates endgame, general PvE content, countdown, stuff like that. And with its talent being as strong as it is, with being able to shock enemies and stuff like hunters and all of that, I think this is a good change. It's just shaving off some of its edge, some of how powerful it is. It's still going to have the same damage, but you just have now a 60-round mag with 15% crit damage and crit chance. Again, I'm in favor of this. I think that's good. It allows other things to breathe a little bit. It promotes usage of some different items. But yeah, test this on the PTS and leave your feedback. Then we get to the Eagle Bearer. Oh my god, any day they announce an EB buff, I gained another year of life here. They're giving it a 5% buff to its 2 crit mods. So instead of it being 10 crit chance and 15 crit damage, it's now 15 crit chance and 20 crit damage. Love it. Perfect. Chef's kiss, no notes. The Chameleon then, it's getting a pretty solid buff. So instead of you having to hit 75 body shots to activate the talent and 30 leg shots, you now only need to hit 65 body shots and 20 leg shots. So that should be pretty nice for the Chameleon, which already has a lot of power if you know how to use it right. That's going to make it even more accessible. The Lady Death is going up. Instead of its mods granting 10 crit chance and 5 crit damage, it's now 15 chance and 10 damage. So that should be a nice little buff there for the Lady Death. The Backfire also going up. They're changing how the talent works. This actually doesn't change the total values of anything at all, right? Because it used to be 1% crit damage for 200 stacks. Now it's 2% crit damage for 100 stacks. So you're still able to get the same 200% crit damage total value. You just now gain it twice as fast. So that should be pretty nice for the Backfire. The mods are also going up by a good chunk. It used to be 5 and 5 for crit chance and damage. It's now 15 and 15. This should definitely give the Backfire a nice little boost. Hopefully that sees people making some more builds for it. So that's pretty nice. The Chatterbox is also going up by a lot. A lot. So firstly, the talent, instead of just being 20% rate of fire for each enemy within 15 meters, it's now 25. So rate of fire buff. And the mods are going from 5% crit damage, you now get 15, and it's getting a 14% base weapon damage buff. The Chatterbox might be the MVP here. It's getting a lot of buffs, and I'll be very curious to see what people can do with that in practice. All right, here we go. Another nerf. The Ouroboros is getting negative 10% rate of fire and 10 less rounds in the mag. Again, people might be upset by this. Personally, I like it. I like when they make balancing changes to promote other usage of stuff. It's still going to be very strong, right? It still is going to have an insane amount of RPM. It's still going to have good usage overall, but it is coming down just a little bit. Specifically in PvP, I think this will be nice. It should, shave off the edge of how powerful that is already. So that's what's going on there. The Iron Lung is getting both a buff and a nerf. Its mods are going up. So instead of, it's actually gaining a new mod. So instead of 10 crit damage on the optic, it's now getting 10 crit chance. And the underbarrel is now 20% crit damage instead of 10. So it's just gaining 10 crit chance because it's shifting around where the crit damage values are. So that's pretty nice, but it is getting a negative 10% base weapon damage nerf. Again, given how prevalent this is in conflict and PvP and stuff, I feel like that's a solid change. The blue screen is getting some good buffs. It's getting 10% extra reload speed and rate of fire on the muzzle mod there, so that is definitely pretty nice. The Bullet King is also getting a solid buff, going from 5% crit chance to 15 on the muzzle, and an extra boost in stability. It's also getting a 10% base weapon damage increase. I could definitely see the Bullet King becoming more popular with those changes. The Ruthless and Merciless are getting some buffs in their mods. 5% extra accuracy, 5% extra stability, 5% extra weapon handling. So that should make it better to handle across the board. I still think it might lack a bit in its functionality, but there you go. The Vindicator is getting a solid little weapon damage buff. Instead of it amplifying damage by 40% to highlighted enemies, it's now 60%. So that's pretty big. All right, and then one last big nerf to talk about here is the Scorpio, our beloved Scorpio. Again, the damage is going to be the same. The effects are going to be the same. All they're doing is that it's now going to require you more shots to stack up some of the bonuses. So instead of it applying poison at one shot, it's now going to be 3. Instead of disorient at 3, it's going to be 6. Shock is now a 9 instead of 6, and the actual debuff where it takes 20% extra damage from all sources is now a 10 instead of 7. Again, I think this is sensible nerfing. They're not nerfing it into the ground, taking away what makes it great. They're just making it so that you have to invest into using it a little bit more. I think that's solid. Again, these changes also apply to PvP. You can see the different modifiers here. So instead of bleed on 1, it's bleed on 3, and etc., etc. That's the changes they're making to the Scorpio. But we're not done yet. Moving on to exotic gear. The Catharsis is getting a buff, which is also kind of surprising, at least in PvP. This is already used a lot. I don't know so much about PvE, but it's going up to 1.5% weapon damage per stack instead of 1. So instead of you being able to gain 30% weapon damage at max stacks, or I guess, 29, same thing, it's now going to be 45%. So that's a pretty sizable little weapon damage buff for the Catharsis. That'll be kind of nice. Then down here we have updated loot pool. So named weapons. In TU22, a fresh batch of named weapons will be added to the loot pool for missions and mission bosses. Here's what you need to know. The original loot tables will remain unchanged, but will now include additional opportunities to obtain the newly added items. While these items will have a higher drop rate, they are not guaranteed rewards and they may still require multiple attempts to acquire. The likelihood of these weapons dropping will increase with the difficulty level of the mission. These new loot drop chances will be exclusive for characters at level 40. Importantly, these changes will not apply to invaded missions and are limited to their regular versions. So if we glance through with this, right, you have stuff like the Pyromaniac going to Camp White Oak, the Kingbreaker as well. A lot of these I think are going to be newer from the seasons that happen after these missions released. So the Pentagon New Reliable, the Lefty from DARPA, that's certainly a popular one with Sledgehammer. The White Death is going to those two, the Burnout and the Born Great at Coney Island, Tidal Basin, the Dare and the Big Show. The Carnage is there. I'm just looking for some that people are going to care about. The Tsunami is at Viewpoint, Baker's Dozen and Union, the stage left as well, Eckham's, the Scalpel, Invisible Hand. So you can read this for yourself. I mean, they're just kind of redistributing where some of the named items can be acquired if you want to target farm some of these things beyond just targeted loot and countdown. So I don't foresee this having a huge effect, but that's a nice little change too, especially considering, like they say, this doesn't change any of the other pre-existing loot tables. Okay, and then lastly down here, I don't think I'm going to read through these. These are just known issues for the PTS specifically, so if you're going to play and you want to know these, then certainly pull up the patch notes and read through them for yourself. They're all listed right there. But my friends, that is the full amount of changes, finally, for Year 6 Season 2 in terms of the balancing efforts they're making and the new items they're adding to the game. I'm certainly out of breath. I don't know if you are, probably not, because you weren't speaking, but tons of changes. As you can see, tons and tons and tons of balancing is being done with this update of the Division 2. And as I've said multiple times throughout this, we are going to need to see how it plays in practice. I'm sure that there are some first reactions people are having off of reading the list here, but paper is always different from gameplay, so when we get into the PTS, we will test as much of this as we can. As always, we will leave as much feedback as we can, and I'll certainly be very curious to see what people's reactions are to everything coming up. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts, though, your first reactions and thoughts, even though we will see what's coming up, so leave that all down below. But I'm going to go get a tall glass of water after that half an hour of reading. So yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in. I will be live with the PTS tomorrow morning. Again, exact timings on the community tab coming soon. Tune in if you want to see me live use some of the new items, test some of the old stuff, everything that's coming. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Until then, RogueGold. Ow.